I never imagined I'd be here, telling all of this to strangers. But I guess that's just how life works sometimes. It has a way of throwing curveballs at you. And before you know it, you're posting on Reddit, confessing that you found yourself in an unbelievably messed up situation involving your wife's best friend. Yeah, I said it. I was with Sarah. And no, it's not what you're thinking. It wasn't some impulsive fling or a moment of uncontrollable passion. No, it was deliberate, calculated, and part of a much bigger mess. One that starts with my wife, Laura, and my brother Tim. I know what you're probably thinking. Here we go, the wife cheated, and the guy's furious. But it's not just that. It's the who that really twisted the knife. My own damn brother, Tim, the golden boy, the one who never seemed to have a problem. You can't make this stuff up, and believe me, I wish I could. But I should probably back up a bit. Let me take you to a time when everything seemed perfect. I had it all, or at least it seemed that way. A beautiful wife, a decent job, and a family that looked rock solid on the surface. We weren't rich, but my parents ran a small family business that did well enough. They always hinted that they'd hand it down to us eventually. You boys will take over this place one day, they'd say. Yeah, about that. I don't know when it started, but there was always this unspoken favoritism in my family. Tim, being the younger, more charming one, could do no wrong. I was always the one working for every ounce of attention, every scrap of validation. If Tim showed up with a half-baked idea, they'd praise him for his ambition. But when I put in the effort, it was just expected. It was like that my whole life. He got the better Christmas presents, more freedom, fewer rules. Hell, even when he messed up, they'd just brush it off. Boys will be boys, my dad would say, like it excused every crappy thing Tim did. And then came to talk about the family business. My parents sat me down, acting all serious, like they were about to drop a bomb on me. Jake, we've been thinking, Tim's got a real gift for this. We want to pass the business to him soon. Just like that. No discussion, no real conversation, just a damn statement. I remember sitting there, feeling my stomach drop, as if everything I had worked for had just evaporated. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. Tim was their guy, but I stayed quiet. What else was I supposed to do? I wasn't about to cause a scene, at least not then. I had Laura, and I figured we'd build our own life. I didn't need the family business. I told myself, we'll figure it out together. But then Laura started to change. At first, I didn't want to believe it. We were good, right? Or at least, that's what I thought. Sure, we had our typical disagreements. What couple doesn't? But then she started acting differently. She became distant, disappearing for hours, telling me she was out with friends or needed some alone time. Whenever I'd ask about it, she'd brush me off, getting defensive, like I was the one in the wrong for even asking. And like a fool, I let it slide. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe everything was okay. Maybe it was just a phase or a rough patch. But then came the lies, the small things that didn't add up. Missed calls, odd excuses, and nights out where she didn't even bother to check in. Yet still, I wanted to believe her. It's messed up, right? When you love someone, you'll do anything to avoid seeing the truth. It wasn't until I talked to one of my friends that I realized I needed answers. Brian, my best friend since we were kids, suggested something that seemed crazy at the time. Install hidden cameras, man, he said. You've got to protect yourself. And that's when it hit me. What if she really was cheating? What if all my suspicions were true, and I was too blind to see it? So, yeah, I did it. I set up cameras in our house. Told myself it was just to calm my nerves, just to catch her in a lie about hanging out with friends or some other innocent excuse. I didn't expect what I found. The first time I watched the footage, it was like I was watching someone else's life. She was in our home with Tim, my own brother, and it wasn't some brief, random thing. It was intense, passionate, like it had been going on for a while. They were laughing together, whispering to each other, acting like I didn't even exist. It felt like I was watching a bad movie, except I was the one getting screwed over. That moment broke me. I can't even put it into words. Betrayal? Sure. But it was more than that. It was humiliation. My wife. My house. With my brother. It felt like everything I knew had been ripped apart. I wanted to explode, to throw it all in their faces. Confront them. Beat Tim to a pulp and scream at Laura until my throat was raw. But I didn't. No. I did something worse. I stayed silent. I let them think they'd gotten away with it. And that's when the wheels started turning. I began planning my revenge. After watching the footage, something inside me snapped. I sat there for hours, staring at the screen, rewatching it over and over again. Each time, the anger grew until I couldn't breathe. You hear about this kind of betrayal, but when it happens to you, when it's your wife and your brother, it feels like you're drowning. And there's no one there to throw you a rope. The first wave was humiliation. Knowing they'd been sneaking around behind my back, using our home as their playground, treating me like I didn't matter, like I was just a damn joke. I kept thinking, how long? How many times had this gone on? I wanted to smash everything, burn the house down, erase every trace of what I'd seen. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. I needed more. I needed to hit them where it hurt. I couldn't act too soon. If I did, I'd lose my chance to make them both regret everything. So I waited. Let the anger simmer. Let it grow until it consumed me. But I wasn't going to do something reckless. No, I had to be smart. I needed cold, calculated revenge. And when the time was right, they wouldn't know what hit them. That's when the idea of Sarah came into my head. Sarah, Laura's best friend. They'd been inseparable since college. And if there was one person Laura trusted, it was her. That's why I knew using Sarah would hit harder than anything else. It wasn't just about getting back at Laura. It was about making the betrayal sting in the worst way possible. I started small. A few casual comments, nothing too obvious. Just enough to plant the seed. I'd mention Laura occasionally, maybe complain about things here and there. Sarah was sharp, though. She sensed something was off between Laura and me even before I made a move. But she didn't press, not at first. Women always know when something's wrong, don't they? Soon enough, I started turning up the charm. Compliments, subtle flirting, a bit of light teasing. Sarah wasn't blind to it. She liked the attention, especially since her relationship with her boyfriend had been falling apart for months. Laura knew all about it, always offering her advice that Sarah clearly wasn't interested in following. It didn't take long before Sarah was responding to my advances, but I wasn't rushing anything. This was going to take time. I had to make it feel natural, like it was inevitable. That's the thing with revenge. It's not about rushing. It's about letting it unfold at its own pace. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about the footage. I kept replaying it in my mind, unable to shake the image of Laura and Tim together. I realized exposing them to me alone wouldn't be enough. They needed to suffer, but not just in private. I wanted the world to see who they really were. It wasn't about shaming them. It was about taking everything they cared about. If I could get that video out there anonymously, there'd be no coming back for them. Tim's reputation would be shattered. As for Laura, people forget a guy's mistakes. But for a woman, not so much. I started researching how to make it happen. Forums, articles, discussions about leaking things without leaving a trace. It was risky, but if I played my cards right, they'd never know it was me. Maybe they'd blame each other. Who knows? The point was, they'd be destroyed, and I'd never have to show my hand. I knew I had to start covering my bases legally, too. Laura had no idea what was coming, and that gave me the advantage. So, I contacted a lawyer. Didn't give away too much, just that I was considering a divorce and needed to protect my assets. When I mentioned I suspected infidelity, he just nodded, like he'd heard it all before. I want to freeze our accounts, I told him. I don't want her touching a single penny when this goes down. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. We can do that, but it'll take some time. You'll need proof of the infidelity, and it can't be just hearsay. Oh, I had plenty of that. I'll get you what you need, I said. We went over the details, how to safeguard my assets and ensure Laura couldn't get her hands on any of our shared savings. I didn't want her seeing this coming. And luckily, the lawyer knew exactly how to handle it. The hardest part, though, keeping everything to myself. I had to act normal, pretend like nothing was wrong, like I wasn't already steps ahead of her. But every time I looked at her, I felt sick. She'd smile at me like nothing had changed, like she hadn't been sneaking around with my brother. And I'd smile right back, all the while plotting how to bring it all crashing down. Meanwhile, Sarah was warming up to me. I could catch her sneaking glances when Laura wasn't looking. It was only a matter of time before I made my move. But I wasn't just going to sleep with her to get back at Laura. No, I needed this to be bigger. Laura had to know. She needed to feel the betrayal like I had. I could feel everything coming together. The pieces were falling into place, and soon enough, the fallout would be glorious. The first step of revenge is patience. You lay the groundwork, make the person feel comfortable, like nothing's wrong. You have to make them think it's their idea, and that's exactly what I needed to do with Laura. I couldn't just charge in, accusing her of being with Tim. She'd either deny it or worse, get defensive and push me away even further. No, I had to play it smart. One evening after dinner, I casually brought it up. We were sitting on the couch, and I acted distant, like something was on my mind. Laura, being Laura, didn't pay much attention at first. She was busy on her phone, probably texting Tim or Sarah. But I had to make her listen. "I've been thinking," I said, leaning back, making sure my tone was calm and collected. "About us. About relationships, in general." She looked up from her phone, a little curious, but not overly concerned. "What do you mean?" I hesitated for effect, like I was trying to figure out how to say it. "You know, marriage is complicated, right? People change. Needs change. I've been reading some stuff online about how some couples keep things fresh by, well, being more open." Her reaction was immediate. Confusion mixed with suspicion. "What are you talking about?" "Open," I said casually, shrugging. "Like an open marriage." I acted like it was no big deal, as if I hadn't been preparing for this moment. Not exactly that, but sort of. I mean, people find different ways to keep things exciting. I think it's worth talking about. She laughed, but it wasn't her usual laugh. It was awkward, nervous, like she didn't know how to respond. "Are you serious right now?" "Look, I'm not saying we should jump into anything. I just think it's something a lot of couples go through, especially after being together for a while. People get bored. They start looking elsewhere, whether they admit it or not." Her eyes narrowed for a moment, and I thought she might call me out, but I stayed calm, giving her just enough space to think it through. It was the perfect setup. Make her think I was considering other options, so she wouldn't suspect that I already knew about her affair with Tim. She had no idea she was being played. "Not yet." "I don't know, Jake," she said, shaking her head. "That sounds crazy. I mean, I've never thought about anything like that." Exactly what I was waiting for. "I get it," I said, backing off a little. "It's not for everyone. But hey, we're adults, right? We should be able to talk about things like this without freaking out. Just a conversation." And that was it. I didn't push any further that night. But I knew I'd planted the seed. It would start eating at her, gnawing at the back of her mind. She was already stepping outside of our marriage, so the idea of something unconventional like an open relationship wasn't exactly foreign to her. But what I needed to do was make her believe that I was on board with it. I had to give her the illusion that I was okay with the idea, that I was opening a door that she could walk through. It didn't take long for her to bring it up again. A few days later, almost out of nowhere, she casually mentioned Sarah. "I was talking to Sarah earlier," she said. "You know, about that thing you mentioned." I played it dumb, acting like I had no idea where she was going with this. "What thing?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what was coming. "The open relationship idea," Laura said. She seemed kind of interested. Apparently, a lot of couples are doing it these days. I could feel a little smirk tug at the corner of my mouth. I knew Laura wouldn't resist talking to Sarah about it. And Sarah? Well, she was already getting caught up in my game, even if she didn't know it yet. "Oh, really?" I said, acting surprised. "What did she think?" Laura shrugged, but I could tell she was intrigued. She wasn't freaked out by it at all. "I don't know. Some couples try it, and it works for them." I let out a laugh. Guess people are more open-minded than we thought. That was it. The moment everything fell into place. Laura didn't even realize that by bringing up Sarah, she was handing me exactly what I needed. Now Sarah was part of this, even if she didn't fully understand the role I was setting up for her. Over the next couple of weeks, things with Sarah escalated slowly. I started texting her more, letting the compliments slip in, throwing a little playful banter in there whenever Laura wasn't around. It didn't take long for Sarah to respond. She was starved for attention, especially with her own relationship falling apart. And with Sarah getting more drawn in, Laura remained oblivious. We started meeting for coffee under the guise of catching up or talking things through. Laura had no reason to suspect anything. She believed Sarah was loyal to her. But what Laura didn't know was that Sarah wasn't as loyal as she appeared. and I was fanning the flames. Eventually, I brought up the whole open relationship thing with Sarah. I made it sound like Laura was all in on it, even though she hadn't exactly agreed yet. I said one evening when it was just the two of us, Laura and I have been talking about trying new things, being more open with each other. It feels like something worth exploring. I watched Sarah closely for her reaction, trying to gauge her level of interest. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" she asked, clearly intrigued. "Yeah, it's all new to us, but I think it's something we might try. Laura doesn't seem to mind, and I think it could be interesting." That was all she needed to hear. For Sarah, that was the green light she had been waiting for. From there, we kept things light. Flirting here and there, some touches, nothing too obvious, but the tension between us grew. You could feel it building. We were edging closer to something bigger. And Laura? She had no idea what was going on. She didn't realize I was setting her up, using Sarah to get my revenge. Finally, the moment came. After weeks of carefully orchestrating everything, I crossed the line with Sarah. It happened one Saturday night when Laura was out, probably with Tim, pretending to be out with friends or whatever excuse she came up with. I didn't care. I had my own plans. Sarah came over, ostensibly just for a drink, but we both knew what was going to happen. The air between us was charged the second she stepped in. Neither of us said a word, but the tension was palpable. We both knew it was only a matter of time before one of us made a move. We sat on the couch sipping wine, and I kept the conversation light. Just a little flirting, a few subtle touches. I could see the way Sarah was looking at me, like she had been waiting for this moment. She was practically leaning into me, eager for me to make the first move. And when I finally did, it felt like everything had come full circle. I leaned in, brushing her hair back, my fingers trailing down her neck. She didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned in, meeting me halfway, her lips parting slightly. That was all I needed. I kissed her deeply, pushing her back onto the couch. My hands wandered, and she didn't pull away. She gave in completely. But here's the thing. It wasn't really about Sarah. It was never about her. Every touch, every kiss was part of a bigger game. It was about power, about taking control. It was about making sure Laura would never see this coming. I was taking something that belonged to her. It happened right there in the living room, without a second thought. Everything I thought was real was shattered in an instant. This wasn't about the act itself. It was about what it meant. When it was over, and Sarah lay there next to me, catching her breath, I felt this wave of triumph. I didn't even care about Sarah anymore. My mind was already focused on Laura, on how this would destroy her. The thought of her finding out that her best friend and I had just slept together behind her back? Perfect. And the best part? Laura had given me the green light by entertaining the whole open relationship idea. She thought she was in control. She thought she was calling the shots. But in reality, I was 3 steps ahead of her. I let Sarah sleep for a while, but my mind was already racing. The next phase of my plan was coming together. The footage. I've been holding on to it for weeks, just waiting for the perfect moment. The video of Laura and Tim in our bed was a ticking time bomb, and I knew the time to set it off was getting closer. It was time to make it happen. I had everything in place. I'd done my research, how to leak the video anonymously, how to ensure it couldn't be traced back to me. It was surprisingly simple. People leak stuff online all the time, and unless you make a serious mistake, it's almost impossible to track down who did it. And I wasn't going to make a mistake. I uploaded the video to several key websites, posting it in places where it would spread fast. No names, no identifying details. Just the raw footage of them, my wife and my brother, acting like they didn't have a care in the world. I knew it would go viral. Once it started getting shared, the comments would flood in, people tearing them apart. I hit submit on the last site and leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. My heart was pounding. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel. Maybe relief, maybe satisfaction. But instead, all I felt was this strange combination of anticipation and anger, like I was waiting for the storm to hit. I knew what was coming. The moment that video spread, there was no going back. Tim and Laura would be humiliated. Their reputations would be destroyed. And that's exactly what I wanted. The next few days felt like a blur. I kept checking the websites, watching the video pick up traction. Comments poured in calling Laura and Tim out, cheaters, liars, scum. They didn't even know their names, but it didn't matter. The video spoke for itself, and the world was listening. Things at home started to shift. Laura noticed the change in me. She wasn't blind. She could sense the distance between us. I stopped caring the way I used to. When she went out, I didn't get upset. I could see the nervousness in her eyes, like she couldn't figure out what was going on. She started asking questions, trying to figure out why I was acting differently. "You've been acting weird lately," she said one night at dinner. "Is something wrong?" I played it off, offering a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just been busy with work." "Why? Is something wrong with you?" She blinked, clearly confused. "No, I don't know. You seem different." I shrugged. "Maybe I'm just starting to see things differently." She didn't like that answer. I could see her unease, but she didn't press it. She was too busy trying to cover her own tracks, too scared that I might uncover the truth about what she had been doing with Tim. But little did she know, I already knew everything. I was just waiting for the right moment to expose it. And Sarah? She had no idea what was really going on. She thought what we had was some exciting, secret affair. She didn't realize she was just another piece of my revenge. Everything was falling into place, and the best part? None of them saw it coming. It was time. I'd waited long enough. The video had already done its damage, and the tension in the house was unbearable. Laura had no idea what was about to hit her, and that's exactly how I wanted it. For weeks, I had played the part of the distant, distracted husband, the guy too caught up in work to notice her lies. She had no clue. But that night, after dinner, I decided it was time to tear her world apart. I sat her down. I could feel the air shift as she sensed something was wrong. She tried to keep things light, thinking she could smooth things over. But that ship had sailed long ago. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. She set her fork down, her brow furrowing in concern. "What's going on?" I leaned back, crossing my arms. "I want a divorce." The words landed like a bomb, and I watched her face twist in confusion and shock. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process what I had just said. "What?" she finally managed, her voice shaky. "Where is this coming from, Jake? What are you talking about?" I almost laughed at how clueless she sounded. Where is this coming from? Like she hadn't been sneaking around with my brother for God knows how long. Like she hadn't been lying to me every single day. "I'm done, Laura. This marriage, it's over." She shook her head, panic creeping into her eyes. No, this doesn't make any sense. We can talk about this, Jake." "What's wrong? Why are you saying this? We've had our rough patches, but we can fix this, right?" I shook my head, keeping my gaze steady. "There's nothing to fix. I'm done. I already talked to a lawyer." Her face went pale. "A lawyer? What the hell, Jake? Why didn't you talk to me first?" "Because there's nothing to talk about," I said coldly. "You're not getting a second chance to fix this." I could see the desperation rising in her eyes as she scrambled for some explanation. Anything to make sense of what was happening. But I didn't let her talk. I didn't let her try to spin her lies. "No," I said, cutting her off. "This isn't going to be some long, drawn-out argument where you pretend to care. I'm in control now. I've already cut you off from our accounts." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You did what?" "You're not getting any money," I said, letting the weight of my words sink in. "No credit cards, no savings. Everything's frozen. You're on your own now." She stared at me, her face twisted in a mix of fear and anger. "You can't just freeze the accounts. What am I supposed to do? I need access to our money." I shrugged, letting her panic take hold. "That's your problem now. You've got nothing. No access to any of it." The realization hit her like a freight train. She looked at me like I was a stranger, like I had just turned into someone she didn't know. But I had been this person all along. She just never bothered to see it. "Jake, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "This doesn't make any sense. We can fix this. Just talk to me. Let me." I cut her off, leaning forward. I looked her dead in the eye. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't just about rough patches, Laura." "I know." Her face went pale. "You know what?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "I know about you and Tim. I've known for weeks. Don't even try to deny it." Her mouth dropped open. Her eyes widened, a mix of shock and horror crossing her face. No, Jake, it's not what you think." I cut her off. "Oh, it's exactly what I think. I said, my voice cold sharp. I've seen the footage. She froze. What footage? The footage of you and Tim betraying me in our home, I said, watching as the color drained from her face. You didn't think I'd find out, did you? But I did. And I've been watching you too for a while now. I know everything, Laura. She stared at me, stunned. Her face twisted in disbelief and terror as her mind scrambled to find some way to fix this. But she was trapped. She knew it. There was no way out. Jake, she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. Save it, I snapped. I don't want to hear your excuses. I've already filed for divorce, and I've made sure you won't get a single dime. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. She was utterly defeated, broken. For a moment, I almost felt sympathy, but it was fleeting. Almost. Then I remembered the video, the lies, the betrayal, and any trace of sympathy disappeared. And just so you know, I added, leaning back in my chair, I wasn't just sitting around waiting for this to blow up in my face. I took matters into my own hands. Her tear-filled eyes flicked to me, a mix of confusion and fear written all over her face. What are you talking about? I let the silence drag for a moment, relishing the tension, before delivering the final blow. I betrayed you with Sarah. Her face twisted into a mix of shock and disbelief. What? You heard me, I said, satisfaction dripping from my voice. Your best friend. I've been involved with her. And guess what? She thinks it's fine because you told her you were cool with open relationships. Her hand shot up to her mouth as the weight of what I just said sank in. Her world was crumbling, and she couldn't do a thing to stop it. You're a monster, she whispered, her voice cracking. I smiled, feeling the power shift entirely in my favor. Maybe, but you made me this way. Laura sobbed, completely shattered. There was nothing left to say. The truth was out, and her betrayal was exposed. Her assets were frozen, and she had lost everything. There was no coming back from this. The divorce went through faster than I'd expected. Once the footage hit, Laura barely had the strength to fight back. It dragged her reputation through the mud, and by the time the final papers were filed, she was a shadow of who she once was. Tim tried to stay out of it, but it didn't matter. His world was falling apart. He lost his job, got kicked out of every family gathering, and our parents finally saw him for the entitled prick he always was. They cut him off. As for Laura, she was a mess. The few times we met in court, she looked worn out, exhausted, and completely broken. Good. I didn't feel guilty. Not one bit. She had done this to herself. The divorce was final. Thanks to the lawyer I'd hired, I got exactly what I wanted: control of our assets, the house, the car. Laura? She walked away with next to nothing, and she knew she'd never see a cent from me again. But once the dust settled, I found myself alone in that big house, the one I had once called home, where we had planned to build a life together. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt more like an end. Sure, I'd won. I had taken everything from her, but it didn't bring the satisfaction I had imagined. I stood there, looking around at the empty rooms. I realized something important. Revenge had consumed me. It had been my driving force, dictating every decision and action. And now that it was all over, I didn't know what to do next. I didn't feel the triumph I had expected. There was no grand moment of closure, no relief. Just silence. Laura was gone, the divorce was final, and I was free. But now what? I didn't have an answer. I buried myself in work for a while, diving into projects and focusing on my career. Without the distraction of my marriage, I had more time to invest in my job. And it felt good. It felt like I was in control again. My boss took notice, giving me more responsibilities. For the first time in a long time, I actually felt like I was accomplishing something for myself. Not for Laura, not for us, but just for me. As for Sarah, things didn't last. After everything blew up, we kept in touch for a while. She'd text me now and then, check in, and we'd meet up occasionally. But the excitement, the thrill of the affair, started to fade. It had been fun, sure, but that's all it ever was. I wasn't in love with Sarah. She was just another pawn in my plan. Eventually, the texts became less frequent until they stopped altogether. She moved on, found someone new. I didn't mind. I didn't need her anymore. and I didn't want to drag her into whatever emotional mess was left inside me. Once the divorce was final, I had a lot of time to reflect on what came next. Starting over sounded simple, but it wasn't. I had spent so many years of my life with Laura, and despite everything, it left a mark. You don't just walk away from that kind of betrayal without scars. But I knew I couldn't stay stuck forever. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had been holding on to: resentment, anger, the need for revenge. And now, with it all behind me, it was time to let go. It was time to start living for myself again. I began going out more, meeting new people, making connections that weren't tied to my past. At first, it felt strange, like I was relearning how to be myself. But over time, I started to find my footing. New friends, new experiences. I even started dating, but I took it slow. No more drama. No more betrayal. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but I was finally enjoying my life without the weight of my marriage holding me down. The last conversation I had with Laura was through our lawyers. There wasn't much left to say. She didn't even look at me during the final court session, and honestly, I was fine with that. There was no apology that could fix what she did. No words could undo the damage. It was better this way. When I walked out of that courtroom, I realized something important. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't feel anything really. She was just someone I used to know. Someone who had hurt me. Yes, but someone who no longer had any power over me. And that was the real victory. The last time I saw Tim was at our parents' house. They had invited me over to discuss the family business, wanting to patch things up after everything that had happened. Tim wasn't there. They cut him off completely. And honestly, I couldn't care less. He made his choices. I made mine. We were done. And as I walked away from that mess, it felt like shedding an old skin. The revenge, the anger, it had served its purpose. But now, it was time for something new, something better. I didn't need to look back anymore. I had everything I needed right in front of me. Freedom, control, and a future that was finally mine to shape.